A cleaning rag, a misplaced blueprint, and one exhausted Filipino janitor just solved a problem that stumped Tokyo's best engineers for 12 years. What happened next made international headlines, sparked a government investigation, and changed how the world's busiest subway system operates forever. This is his story. Manila-born Roberto Santos never imagined his life would lead him to the underground tunnels of Tokyo. Back in 2019, he was just another overseas Filipino worker trying to send money home to his 3 kids in Quezon City. His wife had passed away 2 years earlier from cancer, and the hospital bills had drained everything they had saved. Roberto took the first job offer that came his way, even though it meant cleaning subway stations at night while half the city slept above him. The pay was decent, about 3 times what he made in Manila, but the loneliness was crushing. Tokyo's Shibuya Station is not just any subway stop. It's a massive underground maze where 3 million people pass through every single day. Picture this, 8 different train lines intersecting in a space designed decades ago when the population was half its current size. During rush hour, the congestion is so bad that station attendants have to physically push people into train cars. The Japanese government had spent over 2 billion yen trying to fix the flow of foot traffic, but every solution they tried just made things worse. Roberto's shift started at 11 p.m. and ended at 6 a.m. While salarymen stumbled home drunk and the last trains emptied out, he mopped floors that had been stepped on by thousands of shoes. He cleaned bathrooms, wiped down handrails, and emptied trash bins overflowing with coffee cups and convenience store wrappers. The other janitors were mostly Vietnamese and Nepali workers. They barely talked to each other because of the language barrier. Roberto's Japanese was rough, just enough to understand his supervisor's instructions and order food at the konbini down the street. One thing you need to understand about Roberto is that he wasn't just any janitor. Back in Manila, before his wife got sick, he had worked as a draftsman for a small construction company. Nothing fancy, just drawing up plans for residential buildings and small commercial spaces. He never finished his engineering degree because his father died and he had to drop out to support his siblings. But he had an eye for spatial design, for understanding how people move through spaces. It was a skill he thought he'd never use again. March 15, 2020, started like any other shift. Roberto was cleaning the maintenance office on the 4th basement level when he noticed something unusual. There was a large table covered with blueprint sheets, coffee-stained and marked up with red pen. The engineers must have been working late again, trying to redesign the passenger flow system. They'd been at it for months, and Roberto had seen them looking increasingly frustrated every time he cleaned their office. The blueprints showed complex diagrams of the station's layout, with arrows indicating proposed traffic patterns. Roberto shouldn't have touched anything. His job was to clean around the papers, not look at them. But something caught his eye. One of the proposed designs showed passengers from the Fukutashan line being directed through a long corridor to reach the Hanzaman line. It didn't make sense to him. Why send people the long way around when there was unused space right above the current pathway? He remembered seeing that area during his rounds. It was just storage rooms full of old equipment and outdated signage from the 1980s. Without thinking too much about it, Roberto pulled out a pen from his pocket. His supervisor had given it to him last Christmas, one of those fancy multicolored pens that Japanese office workers love. He started sketching on a blank corner of one of the blueprint sheets. Just a rough idea, nothing formal. What if they knocked down the storage rooms and created a direct pathway? What if they added stairs here instead of there? What if the escalators ran in the opposite direction during peak hours? His hand moved almost automatically, muscle memory from his drafting days taking over. 20 minutes passed. Roberto had completely forgotten he was supposed to be cleaning. He was so focused on the sketch that he didn't hear the door open behind him. "Nani Shidaru no? What are you doing?" The voice made Roberto jump so hard he knocked over his cleaning bucket. Water spilled across the floor, mixing with the coffee stains on some of the papers. Standing in the doorway was Tanaka-san, one of the senior engineers. He was known for working crazy hours and being extremely particular about his blueprints. Roberto's heart sank. Roberto started apologizing in broken Japanese, bowing repeatedly while trying to mop up the spilled water with his rag. He was certain he was about to get fired. Tanaka-san walked slowly toward the table, his face unreadable. He picked up the blueprint sheet where Roberto had been sketching. For a long moment, he just stared at it. Then he looked at Roberto, then back at the paper. "You drew this?" he asked in careful English. Roberto nodded, preparing for the worst. Instead of yelling, Tanaka-san did something unexpected. He sat down and asked Roberto to explain what he was thinking. Through a mixture of broken English, hand gestures, and more sketches, Roberto explained his idea. He talked about the wasted space in the storage areas. He pointed out how passengers naturally wanted to take the shortest route, but the current design forced them into bottlenecks. He suggested a diagonal pathway that didn't exist in any of the official plans. Tanaka-san listened without interrupting, occasionally making small sounds of acknowledgement. When Roberto finished, the engineer sat back in his chair and was quiet for almost a full minute. Then he said something that would change everything. "Can you come back tomorrow night?" The next night, Roberto returned to find not just Tanaka-san, but 3 other engineers waiting for him. They had cleaned off the entire table and set up fresh blueprint sheets. They wanted Roberto to draw out his full vision for the station redesign. He tried to explain that he wasn't qualified, that he was just a janitor, that he didn't have the proper training. But Tanaka-san insisted. "Fresh eyes," he said in English. "We've been looking at this problem for so long, we can't see new solutions anymore. You see the station differently than we do." Over the next 2 weeks, Roberto lived a double life. During the day, he slept in his tiny apartment in Saitama. At night, he cleaned the station for the first few hours of his shift, then spent the rest of the time working with the engineering team. They gave him proper drafting tools and showed him their computer modeling software. Roberto's hands remembered skills he thought he'd forgotten. He drew pathways and staircases, suggested changes to escalator placements, and identified dead spaces that could be converted into efficient corridors. The engineers started calling him Santos-sensei, Teacher Santos, as a joke at first, but then with genuine respect. What made Roberto's approach different was simple. He thought like a tired person trying to get home, not like an engineer trying to optimize theoretical flow rates. He knew which routes people actually took because he saw the dirt patterns on the floors every night. He noticed where people instinctively tried to go, even when signs directed them elsewhere. He understood that commuters don't read maps when they're exhausted after a 12-hour workday. They follow their gut, and if the design fights against human instinct, it creates chaos. This wasn't something you could learn from a textbook. By April, the engineering team had developed a complete redesign based on Roberto's sketches. But there was a problem. How could they present this to their supervisors and the Tokyo Metro management? How could they explain that their multi-billion-yen solution came from a janitor with an unfinished engineering degree? In Japan's rigid corporate culture, this was more than just unusual. It was potentially embarrassing for everyone involved. The engineers could look incompetent. Management might reject the whole plan just because of where it came from. Tanaka-san came up with a plan. They would present the redesign as a collaborative effort, without mentioning Roberto's role specifically. Roberto was fine with this. He didn't want attention. He just wanted to finish his contract and go home to his kids. But word started spreading anyway. Other janitors had seen Roberto working with the engineers late at night. Station staff had noticed the unusual collaboration. Someone took a photo of Roberto hunched over blueprints and posted it on social media with a curious caption. The photo went viral in the Filipino community in Japan. In May 2020, just as the COVID-19 pandemic was hitting Japan hard, Tokyo Metro made an announcement. They were going to implement a major redesign of Shibuya Station that would improve passenger flow by an estimated 40%. Construction would begin once pandemic restrictions allowed. The press release thanked the engineering team but made no mention of anyone named Roberto Santos. For a few weeks, it seemed like Roberto's contribution would remain a secret known only to the handful of people directly involved. Then a Japanese journalist named Yuki Yamamoto changed everything. She had seen the viral photo of the Filipino janitor working on blueprints and got curious. She started investigating, talking to station workers, tracking down people in the photo's background. When she finally found Roberto, he tried to downplay his role. But Yamamoto was persistent. She interviewed Tanaka-san and the other engineers. She reviewed the blueprints and compared Roberto's original sketches to the final approved design. The similarities were undeniable. She published her findings in the Asahi Shimbun, one of Japan's biggest newspapers. The story exploded. Within days, it was international news. CNN ran a segment. BBC interviewed Roberto via video call. Filipino news channels back home tracked down his family in Quezon City. His kids suddenly saw their father being called a hero, a genius, an accidental engineer. The Philippine embassy in Tokyo issued a statement celebrating Roberto's achievement. Social media was flooded with posts about the Filipino janitor who outsmarted Japanese engineers. Some people loved the story. Others were skeptical. And some Japanese engineers felt insulted by the implication that a foreigner with no formal qualifications had shown them up. Tokyo Metro's management found themselves in an impossible situation. They couldn't deny Roberto's contribution anymore because the evidence was public. But acknowledging it officially meant admitting that their expensive engineering team had needed help from a cleaning staff member. After weeks of internal debate and pressure from both Japanese and international media, they released a new statement. They formally recognized Roberto Santos as a consulting contributor to the Shibuya Station redesign project and announced they would be offering him a position as a design consultant. Roberto didn't know what to do. The consulting position came with a salary that would let him bring his kids to Japan and enroll them in international school. It was an opportunity most overseas Filipino workers could only dream about. But it also meant staying in a country where he felt isolated and out of place, where his success had created resentment among some people, where he'd always be known as that janitor no matter what title they gave him. His mother-in-law, who had been taking care of his kids, told him to accept it. His friends back in Manila told him he'd be crazy to refuse. What nobody outside his immediate circle knew was that Roberto was struggling. The sudden fame had made him anxious. News crews would sometimes show up at the station trying to interview him during his shift. His face was recognizable now, and some passengers would stare or try to take selfies with him. He started having trouble sleeping during the day. The pressure to accept the consulting position, to be grateful, to represent all Filipino workers well, it was crushing him. He'd left Manila to escape one kind of pressure and had found himself under a completely different kind. In August 2020, construction on the Shibuya Station redesign officially began. Roberto was invited to the groundbreaking ceremony as a guest of honor. He wore a borrowed suit that didn't quite fit and stood next to Tokyo Metro executives and government officials while photographers took pictures. The governor of Tokyo shook his hand and said something in Japanese that the translator told him meant, "You've shown us that innovation can come from anywhere." Roberto smiled politely, but inside he felt like an imposter. He was a janitor who had made a lucky sketch, nothing more. The redesign took 18 months to complete. During that time, Roberto continued working as a janitor while occasionally consulting on small details of the construction. He turned down most interview requests and avoided social media. His kids would video call him every week, excited to tell him that their friends at school knew their dad was famous. Roberto never knew how to respond. He wasn't trying to be humble. He genuinely didn't understand what the big deal was. To him, he just noticed some obvious problems and suggested obvious solutions. Any draftsman would have seen the same things. February 2022 marked the completion of the Shibuya Station redesign. The new layout opened to the public on a Tuesday morning. The difference was immediate and dramatic. Passenger flow improved even more than predicted, not 40% but nearly 60%. Bottlenecks that had existed for decades were gone. Commuters found themselves moving through the station faster, with less confusion, less stress. The elderly and disabled could navigate the space more easily. Even during rush hour, the crushing congestion that had been part of daily life for millions of people was significantly reduced. Engineering journals started publishing articles analyzing the redesign. What made Roberto's approach work was its simplicity. He hadn't tried to force complex solutions onto a complex problem. Instead, he'd identified the core issues that people actually experienced: confusing pathways, unnecessary detours, and spaces that worked against human instinct. Academic researchers from universities across Japan began studying the case. Some praised it as an example of practical knowledge trumping theoretical expertise. Others argued it showed the need for more diverse perspectives in urban planning. Everyone had an opinion. By mid-2022, Roberto had saved enough money to return home to the Philippines. He accepted a modest one-time consulting fee from Tokyo Metro but declined the permanent position they offered. He told Tanaka-san, who had become something like a friend, that he just wanted to be with his kids again. He wanted to watch them grow up, not through video calls but in person. Tanaka-san understood. On Roberto's last day, the engineering team took him out for dinner at an expensive yakiniku restaurant. They gave him a framed copy of his original sketch, the one he'd drawn that night in March 2020. Back in Manila, Roberto struggled to readjust to normal life. Job offers came from construction companies who wanted to use his name for publicity. Universities invited him to give talks. The media wanted follow-up stories. But Roberto just wanted to be a regular father again. He eventually found work at a small architecture firm, nothing glamorous, just steady work that let him pick up his kids from school every day. His daughter, the oldest at 14, started showing interest in engineering. She'd ask him about the Tokyo project, and he'd tell her it wasn't as impressive as everyone made it seem. She didn't believe him. Today, the Shibuya Station redesign is considered one of the most successful urban infrastructure improvements in modern Japanese history. Other subway systems around the world have studied it and implemented similar approaches. Roberto's name appears in academic papers and case studies, usually with the phrase "untrained but observant" attached to it. Engineers still debate whether his success was luck, intuition, or proof that formal education sometimes blinds experts to simple solutions. Tokyo Metro occasionally mentions him in their promotional materials, though they're careful to also credit their engineering team. Roberto Santos never sought fame or recognition. He was just a widower trying to provide for his children, who happened to be in the right place with the right skills at the right time. His story raises uncomfortable questions about expertise, credentials, and whose knowledge gets valued in our society. It challenges the assumption that the most educated person in the room always has the best answer. And it reminds us that sometimes the people closest to a problem, the ones who experience it daily, see solutions that experts have overlooked. The Filipino janitor didn't just redesign a subway station. He redesigned how we think about who gets to be an innovator.